today we're talking about security and compliance, specifically around our Sensitive Content Manager solution and the way it marries with the legacy ControlPoint solution that we offer. ControlPoint obviously is our flagship compliance product line, and Sensitive Content Manager fits directly into that product space very neatly. And today we're going to be talking about and looking at kind of some of the ways that we actually do that. So I'm just going to run through the agenda here real quick just so we get an idea of what we're going to be talking about. First and foremost, we're going to talk about what are the various options that we do have at our disposal in the compliance and ControlPoint tool with regard specifically to Sensitive Content Manager, particularly some of the actions such as our ability to perform analysis of content in the form of analysis jobs and how we can manage subsequently quarantined documents from those analyses. We're also going to be looking at some of the reporting capabilities, particularly a couple of reports, the compliance summary and sensitive document activity reports, which are basically going to give us a nice overview of what we've accomplished. We're going to take a look at some of the management aspects, such as managing compliance actions, managing submission maintenance. Those terms will make more sense as we go through the session. Moving along, we're going to actually create an analysis scan job in ControlPoint, so you can see kind of how that works in terms of defining the parameters for the job, in terms of, selecting your profile, determining what filtering needs to be in place, and even touch on some policy automation. And you'll see I have an asterisk next to that item. And that's because I could really probably have an entire quick take on the subject of policy automation. So we're going to very lightly touch on that and not get too deep, but I do want to kind of show some of the capabilities there. We'll look at scheduling of those scan jobs, and moving on, we'll start to do some actual reporting. Again, to reiterate, a couple of those reports I want to take a look at. And then finally, we'll wrap everything up by taking a look at some of the management and maintenance options around these concepts, particularly, again, managing those quarantine documents, managing the content submissions that we create in the analysis job history, a couple of other things as well. And for the most part, what we're talking about today can be seen from the context of the ControlPoint user guide. So if you guys have the user guide on hand, you can easily follow along with most of what I'll be talking about. And then at the end of it all, we'll have a question and answer period. So all that said, I'm going to jump out of my slides here and go to my live box, and we're going to take a look at ControlPoint. So one of the things that I want to kind of disclaimer here is it's important to note that a lot of what we'll talk about kind of makes a couple of assumptions, right? So we won't be talking about creation of profiles in Sensitive Content Manager. We won't be talking about creation and management of search terms, regular expressions, etc. All the back-end administrative work that occurs in Sensitive Content Manager specifically, we're assuming has taken place. And now we're talking about actually managing and utilizing those pre-configured concepts from the context of our global compliance solution, in this case, ControlPoint. So I just want to make sure that's clear that for the most part, what we're talking about today is all from the context of the end use, right? The actual administration of pre-configured and pre-set Sensitive Content Manager configurations. So what we're looking at here is my lab environment. So I've got ControlPoint installed, and I'm managing in this case, a 2013 SharePoint environment. It could be any. That's kind of neither here nor there. But as you can see here in my dashboard, I've got a couple of cool things to see right off the bat in regard to compliance. This is one of the new features of ControlPoint, giving us an option to see our GDPR dashboard, which is going to give us information specifically relevant to the sensitivity of our data in a dashboard format. So that's where I'm starting, but where I want to go, and for those of you that are familiar with ControlPoint, you'll know I can expand my hierarchy here and kind of work from whatever scope I want. I've targeted a particular site collection called engineering, and I'm going to be working from that context for the most part here. So what options are available to me in ControlPoint for compliance? Well, if I right-click on engineering, you'll notice that I have a very telling subcontext here called compliance. And within that category, I've got quite a few options. I've got a few actions. As you know, in ControlPoint, anytime you see this gear icon with the play button, you know that this is an actionable item, something that we can configure and create. Anytime you see this graph icon, that's a report that we can report on data that's been collected. So a couple of actions I can create, a couple of reports. So we'll kind of go through these. Obviously, analyze content is going to be where we're spending a lot of our time today. That's creating the analysis jobs. I can manage quarantine documents. I can create the aforementioned compliance summary, sensitive document activity report. I can even see a couple of other reports that are going to show me scanned files according to scope or search terms. So we'll definitely poke into a couple of these reports as time goes by. But real quick, let me just show you a couple of other things on the management side. We have a couple of other options here in the manage section under compliance. Now we can see that we can manage our profiles, and this is directly related to profiles as they're created in Sensitive Content Manager's backend, right? So I can definitely report on, view, edit, and identify those profiles here. Same with my search terms, same with my users. Two that we'll probably look at today, sensitive content submission maintenance and control point compliance actions. We're going to take a look at those at the end of the session. And these are going to give us the ability to kind of manage some of the downstream actions that are available once we do identify and flag data as sensitive, and some of the reporting capabilities as well. So not to get too deep into that, let's kind of jump back over here to our engineering site collection. And let's go ahead and run our first action, which is to create an analysis job. So if I go to my compliance category here and I select Analyze Content, this should bring us up to a standard kind of control point user experience action. So obviously I can create a name for the scan, I can call it whatever I want, I can give it a description, call that whatever I want. And the first thing I'm going to do in terms of configurable parameters is I'm going to select which SCM or Sensitive Content Manager profile I'm going to leverage for this particular analysis job, right? So as you can see here, I'm showing now a drop-down that is exposing to me all of the profiles that have been configured in the Sensitive Content Manager backend administration. Again, all of which is covered in other quick take topics. Again, we're making some assumptions here that we've already gone through that. So my profiles are created. Now it's a matter of just selecting which profile I'm going to leverage for this particular analysis job, which, by the way, is occurring against my engineering site collection. So with control point, just as a reminder, it's all about defining your scope, defining your parameters, and then executing a job against those scopes with those parameters, right? So I define, let's say I'm going to get all the PII information in the engineering site collection. I have some options here whether or not I'm going to resubmit files that haven't changed since they were previously scanned or not. If I want to filter anything out, I can certainly do so here and select what I do and don't want to include. We'll go with all for the purposes of this demonstration, but pretty simple, right? Very much just direct, just select the profile and go. Remember, most of our configuration occurs at the Sensitive Content Manager administration side of things. So all my profiles, all my search terms, all the regular expressions I'm leveraging, all that's defined in the engine for Sensitive Content Manager. We're merely leveraging those pre-configured concepts from the scope of control point now, which makes things very tidy and easy. And we can actually, distribute the management of those different tasks amongst different role members if we needed to, et cetera, et cetera. So defined my profile, created some filtering. Next thing I need to do is schedule this to occur. So we could give the job a name of anything we want, determine whether or not it's active, which we'll see momentarily where that becomes relevant. And then we just basically give it a schedule. Now this is going to be part and parcel to any other scheduled action you'd see in Control Point. Very standard stuff, functions a lot like a Windows task scheduling concept. We also have some distribution details. Once this analysis completes, who gets informed, right? In the form of, people picking, or you can put a group in here, whatever the case may be. We can even customize the subject and message. And that's really it, guys. I mean, very simple stuff. We're just defining what we're leveraging, what we're attempting to compare our data to in terms of our sensitive content profile, and then putting it on a schedule to occur. And once I click Analyze, it'll run this immediately. I can save it for later execution, et cetera, et cetera. And what we'll end up with is a list of items that have been flagged or not flagged, right? So I want to take one step back and kind of talk about this from the context of automation. It's possible Even though I'm working with an ad hoc analysis job here, i.e. I'm creating the job right now, running it right now, or scheduling it right now, it's important to remember that all of this can be done via policy. And this is what I mentioned earlier I was going to touch on a little bit, but not necessarily get too deep into. But keep in mind, in our automation category, we have this concept of creating a control point policy. And a control point policy is basically an automated task to do X action. For instance, you could maybe control who can and can't create subsites, control what type of files get uploaded, what size, et cetera, et cetera. These are, controlling the SharePoint, right? Control point. So the last two items in this options for policy rules are to scan items for sensitive data, either when the content is added or when the content is updated or saved. So this is going to be basically watching the data in the selected scope, and anytime something's added, go ahead and execute an analysis job that's going to give us information on sensitivity of data. And this is, I think, where the real power of control points starts to show itself, right? Now, it's one thing to be able to go in and ad hoc analyze things retroactively, but to be able to have this kind of real-time, proactive approach to analysis is where control point starts to really show its colors. So just to, again, I just want to touch on that briefly. So I want to kind of get through the rest of this stuff as fast as I can because I know we're running out of time already, but just keep in mind that policy automation is a big part of control point, and it's something that you should take advantage of if you aren't already. Let's take a look at some of these reports that we've got here. So we've already run some analyses. So let's take a look at compliance summary, our first report. What this report is going to give us is basically a breakdown of the jobs that have occurred over time. So let me just open up my date times here, and you can see here I can basically report on all the scan jobs that have occurred, right? So on the 6th, we ran something that we called the GDPR engineering site scan, and it scanned for engineering site with out-of-the-box GDPR profile. And we found that we reviewed 511 out of 559 items, and in this case, 0 compliance actions were applied. As you can see, when I selected it, I now have a very nice view of exactly what occurred in that scan job, right? 329 or 58.5% passed. Some were unable to classify, a couple were severe, a couple were moderate, et cetera, et cetera. So basically what this is it gives us a nice overview of the state of affairs for that particular compliance job. And we can kind of look at these in their various iterations, right? So we can see things like when the next scheduled compliance scan is set to occur. In this case, there's none scheduled, but if I had this as part of a policy, it might show that. If I had this as a scheduled recurring job on a weekly basis, it would reflect that. I can go in and I can apply compliance actions if I wanted to. I can go view the items that were affected by those actions, and so on and so forth. I can even manage my quarantine items right from in here, and we'll get to that in a moment. My other report that I wanted to mention is sensitive document activity, and this guy is going to basically show us some pretty cool stuff. Let's see here. So right off the bat, I can see, right, even from the past month, just a quick overview of my sensitive document activity. The total number of SCM classified documents I've found this time period, 162. How many sensitive documents have been accessed? How many users are accessing those sensitive documents, right? So this is the kind of information that defines compliance, right? So we understand now, we've analyzed some data, we know where the sensitive data lives and what it is. Now we can kind of do some batch reporting against them to see, hey, are these things getting accessed? Who's accessing them? How many people have accessed this? Et cetera, et cetera. So I think these two reports represent the meat and potatoes of the compliance reporting section. Now, certainly I can go look at scanned files specifically by scope, et cetera, to get some more additional granularity. But for the most part, those two reports I think are where the action is, so to speak. So to quickly pivot, and I know I'm going fast, it's a lot of data. So we've scanned items, we can report on them. Once we scan an item, we have to take action on what we get back. So whenever you scan a data point to determine its sensitivity, again, according to the rules in Sensitive Content Manager, you get one of 3 criticality or severity levels according to that particular document. And those are mild, moderate, and severe, right? So what does that mean? Well, here in Control Point, we can define what that means. we can say that if a document comes back with a mild sensitivity, let's say I want to take no action, but I do want to let so-and-so know, right? However, when it's moderate, I want to go ahead and quarantine it. And I'm going to go ahead and let some people know when that occurs, right? When it's severe, well, guess what? I want to go through an approval workflow, or maybe I want to remove it outright and let my leaders know. So as you can see, these downstream actions are defined here in this manage section, by the way, manage control point compliance actions. And now I'm defining, well, once I've scanned this data, my analysis job gives me a mild, moderate, severe. Well, what do I do with that? Well, this is the answer to that, right? So generally speaking, and the pretty common case is that when you get mild or moderate, you're going to probably want to quarantine those items as sensitive so that you can take action on them later. And once that's done, you then come to this, for the scope in question, manage quarantined documents, right? So as documents get quarantined, you can always come in here as a compliance administrator and manage those quarantine documents. As you can see, I've got a handful of stuff in here that's been quarantined. I can do things like remove them from quarantine or delete them if they're too sensitive for this particular scope. Nothing that's that sensitive should be in this site collection. Well, guess what? I can go ahead and delete it out. As a compliance administrator, and now that's a terminology I should probably make note of. Compliance administrator is a security group within Control Point that will give you access to administer at this level. So as a compliance administrator, I have the ability and the power, so to speak, to define what does and doesn't get available in a particular scope according to sensitivity. So we're at the 10-minute mark, so I should probably start to try to wrap all this up. I'm going to go through really quickly and just summarize everything we talked about. In the hierarchy view of Control Point, we have a section of compliance actions and reports. From here, we can configure and create an analysis job ad hoc. We can manage documents that have been quarantined by an analysis job. And we can run reporting on the results of those analysis jobs according to document and sensitivity. From the manage view in Control Point, we can take a look at all the different analysis jobs that have been submitted and manage those directly. We can define and control our downstream actions for what occurs when an item is flagged as mild, moderate, or severe. And furthermore, above all this, these analysis jobs and tasks can be automated according to a Control Point policy to mandate that data get flagged and analyzed as it's added to SharePoint. And then to wrap everything up into a nice little package, in our dashboard section, we have a new GDPR dashboard that will give us very high-level statistics and metrics regarding our sensitive data and regarding the overall compliance of our data in regard to GDPR. That kind of wraps up the main portion. So I guess if there's any questions from anyone, now would be the time to post them. So the first question is, what level of privilege is needed to run scan jobs and report on analyzed content? And as I alluded in the end there, we actually have a security group within Control Point that is used to manage these tasks. So basically, let me see if I can get this to come up in a timely manner, but basically we have a group in your compliance configuration site. Anyone who's worked with Control Point should be familiar with this. And in my people and groups, I do have a group called Control Point Compliance Administrators. The Compliance Administrators group, if a user is here, he will have access to all of these configuration options for compliance activities, things like setting up analysis jobs, running reports, etc. Note, we have a separate group for quarantine administration. That means that we can separate and granularize those different roles. For instance, yes, we have an end user who has the ability to create and configure those analysis jobs, but it's outside of his wheelhouse to actually determine whether or not scanned content or quarantined content should be removed, should be added, etc. So we have a separate security group to manage that in case those roles need to be disparate. And let's see. Okay, another question. Under which category and control point hierarchy view are sensitive content analysis options found? And again, just to reiterate, everything that you need to know for creating these analysis jobs is neatly packaged in a single compliance category. So whenever you right-click on whatever scope you're interested in, whether that be the farm, whether that be the web app, whether that be a site collection, if you go to this compliance node, you'll see all your options there. And then again, this includes actionable items like creating analysis jobs or managing your quarantine. It also includes reporting options like compliance summary, etc. The only other place where you would manage anything is from the Manage tab, where we can do things like, again, manage those downstream actions, manage profile maintenance from SCM, your actual analysis jobs, or even control point policies if that's the way you want to go.